The scent of lavender-scented bathwater filled the marble bathroom, soft steam curling up to the gilded mirrors lining the walls as Sophia leaned back against the edge of the massive clawfoot tub, her delicate fingers trailing lightly across the surface, eyes closed while she tried to steady her breath. Outside, the night was silent, the stars hidden behind the towering walls of the Beaumont estate, one of the most powerful and influential families in the country. But inside her chest, Sophia felt anything but peaceful. She should have felt lucky. Everyone told her so. Sophia Beaumont, 23, heiress to the Beaumont fortune, had returned to her family's side after 5 years of studying abroad, carefully groomed to be the perfect lady, the perfect daughter, the perfect bride, and in just 2 weeks she was to be married to Charles Atherton, heir to a powerful political dynasty, an alliance carefully orchestrated by both families, a bond meant to solidify power, wealth, and influence. Sophia hated every part of it. She squeezed her eyes shut tighter, sinking a little deeper into the warm water. The golden light of the chandelier flickered softly above her, casting delicate patterns on the pale tiles, and she felt the tension in her shoulders, the ache in her chest, the weight pressing on her like invisible chains. This bath was supposed to be her moment of peace, one small escape, before her world was handed over, before her freedom was signed away in the form of marriage papers she'd never wanted to see, and yet, even here, even now, the walls seemed to close in. Suddenly, a faint noise echoed from somewhere outside the bathroom, a heavy thud, the unmistakable creak of a door, and Sophia's eyes snapped open, heart hammering in her chest as she listened, the water rippling gently around her. Maybe it was just a servant, maybe someone had knocked over a vase in the hallway, but something felt wrong, deeply wrong, the kind of wrong that crawled up your spine and whispered danger. Before she could call out, the door to the bathroom swung open, and a tall figure stepped inside. Sophia's breath caught in her throat as the man who filled the doorway froze her in place. Not a butler, not a family friend, but a stranger, draped in black, a smear of blood along his temple, dark hair tousled, jaw sharp, eyes like a winter storm, cold, dangerous, commanding. His gaze swept the room, freezing on the bath where Sophia sat, stunned in horror, clutching the edge of the tub, and her mouth opened, ready to scream. But in one swift movement, the man crossed the room, clapped a gloved hand over her mouth, his body pressing dangerously close as he hissed, "Don't!" Sophia's heart pounded so loud she thought she might faint, staring up at him, trembling, her wet skin prickling under his intense gaze. For a long, stretched moment, they simply stared at each other, predator and prey, yet something electric pulsed between them, something sharp and undeniable, something that made her stomach twist with a heat she did not understand. Then, to her shock, the man leaned in, his lips grazing her ear as he whispered, "Sorry, princess." And before Sophia could react, his mouth crushed onto hers in a fierce, claiming kiss. She gasped into him, her mind spinning, her fingers tightening around the porcelain rim, still trying to understand, to fight back, to process what was happening when he pulled back slightly, his eyes locked on hers, a small, wicked smirk playing at the corner of his mouth as he murmured, "That's better, now. You're mine." Sophia sat frozen in the tub, her chest heaving as she stared at the man standing inches away, the steam curling softly between them while her mind raced wildly, trying to grasp what had just happened, who the stranger was, why he was here, and how he dared touch her like that. His eyes held hers firmly, a glint of something dark flickering beneath the sharp lines of his face, and when he finally stepped back just a fraction, she saw his chest rising and falling, as if he too was breathing hard, as if some part of him had been caught off guard. She yanked the blanket she had draped nearby and wrapped it tightly around herself, the silk sticking damply to her skin, as her voice finally came out in a sharp, shaking whisper, "Who are you? What do you want?" The man tilted his head slightly, his smirk still playing at the edge of his mouth, and answered calmly, "You'll find out soon enough, princess, but right now, I need you to be quiet and do exactly as I say if you want to live." His words were low, deliberate, not cruel but firm, and they sent a chill racing down Sophia's spine despite the warmth of the bathwater. She opened her mouth to protest, to call for help, but something in his eyes, a shadow of real danger, stopped her cold. This wasn't some petty thief, she realized. This man was something much worse. The stranger glanced toward the bathroom door, his expression sharpening, and with a swift, practiced motion, he reached into his jacket, pulling out a sleek black pistol, checking the magazine before tucking it back under his coat. Sophia's heart lurched, painfully, in her chest, her fingers clenching tighter around the edge of the tub as she watched, realizing in a sudden, terrifying moment that she wasn't just caught in a random break-in, she was face to face with a man who knew how to kill. He turned back to her, his voice quieter now, but no less commanding. "Get dressed now. We don't have much time." She hesitated, trembling, but the sharp look he gave her left no room for argument. She climbed carefully from the tub, pulling the blanket tighter around herself, trying to keep her head high, trying to remember she was a Beaumont, a woman raised in privilege, power, and influence, not some helpless girl. As she dressed quickly in a silk robe, her hands shaking, her mind flashed to the world she thought she knew, the looming marriage she hated, the weight of her family's expectations crushing her, and now, somehow, this man, this night, this terrifying collision she could never have seen coming. She looked at him again, really looked, noting the sharp lines of his jaw, the faint scar along his cheekbone, the piercing gray eyes that held secrets she could barely begin to imagine, and something in her chest, twisted unexpectedly, something that had nothing to do with fear. Damon Valenti, known in hushed whispers across the city as the most dangerous mafia boss alive, the man who ruled the underworld with ruthless efficiency, the man who had survived assassination attempts, betrayals, and bloody wars, now stood in her bedroom, bleeding, cornered, and yet somehow utterly in control. He wasn't supposed to be here. No one was supposed to know her private rooms, her guarded wing of the estate, and yet here he was, as if fate itself had drawn him into her world. He watched her tie the belt of her robe with an unreadable expression, his eyes flicking briefly to the delicate line of her neck, before snapping back to her face, and then, without a word, he strode to the window, pulling back the heavy curtains just a sliver to peer out into the darkened garden. Sophia's voice came out tight, barely above a whisper. "Why are you here? Why me?" He turned, meeting her gaze steadily, and after a long pause he answered, "Because you're in the middle of something you don't even understand, and right now I'm the only one who can keep you alive." His words hit her like a slap, sending a surge of cold panic through her chest. Before she could ask another question, a sharp sound echoed from outside, the distinct metallic click of a weapon being loaded, and Damon's head snapped toward the door. In a flash, he crossed the room, grabbed Sophia by the arm, and pulled her firmly behind him, his body tense, every muscle coiled as he murmured, "Stay close to me, no matter what happens." Sophia clutched at the silk of his jacket, her breath catching, her heart racing so fast she thought she might faint. She could feel the strength in his arm, the hard tension of his body as he stepped silently toward the door, every inch the predator ready to strike. She was caught in a world she didn't understand, swept into the heart of a deadly storm, and yet, somehow, standing in the shadow of this dangerous man, she felt a strange flicker of something she had never felt before. Not fear, not entirely, but the smallest spark of exhilaration. Sophia's breath trembled as she pressed herself against Damon's back, the silk of her robe brushing against the coarse fabric of his jacket, while she tried to make sense of the chaos unfolding around her. Less than an hour ago, she had been sinking into her scented bath, trying to forget the chains of her impending marriage, and now She was gripping the arm of a Mafia boss, her heart thundering as voices and footsteps echoed beyond her door. Damon's hand tightened briefly around hers, a subtle signal for silence, and Sophia bit down hard on her lip to stop the soft whimper rising in her throat. From the hallway came a voice, sharp, male, clipped with authority. "Search every room, the bastard's here somewhere." Sophia's eyes widened in panic, but Damon was already moving, his motion smooth and sure, like a shadow cutting through the darkness. He pulled her toward a concealed panel near the wardrobe, pressing his fingers against a hidden switch that opened a narrow passageway, one Sophia had never even known existed. Without waiting, he guided her through, the door sliding shut silently behind them, cutting off the faint glow of the bedroom and plunging them into near total blackness. The passage was tight, the air cool and slightly musty, and Sophia stumbled slightly as she tried to follow Damon's quick, sure steps. She whispered, "Where are you taking me?" But he only murmured, "Somewhere safe, if you trust me." That if hung heavy between them, because how could she trust a man who had stormed into her life uninvited, who had kissed her without warning, who had pulled her into danger and expected her to follow? Yet her fingers stayed wrapped tightly in his, the warmth of his grip the only thing steady in a night that had spiraled completely out of control. They emerged into another room, this one small, lined with bookshelves and old furniture, a space Sophia vaguely recognized as a disused study in the East Wing. Damon exhaled softly, his shoulders relaxing just slightly, though his hand never left the gun at his hip. He turned to her at last, his eyes sharp and assessing, as he murmured, "They're after me, but they'll use you if they catch you here. I need you to understand, Princess, this isn't just about me anymore." Sophia swallowed hard, her throat dry as she whispered, "Why should I believe you? You broke into my home. You—" But her words faltered as his gaze softened for the briefest moment, a flicker of something vulnerable crossing his hardened face. "I didn't mean to drag you into this," Damon said quietly, his voice lower now, almost gentle. "But now that you're here, I won't let them touch you." For a moment the room felt still, the world outside their fragile bubble fading to a distant murmur, and Sophia found herself studying his face, the faint scar along his cheekbone, the sharp lines of his jaw, the eyes that had seen too much. This man, this criminal, should have terrified her, and yet standing here, she felt a strange sense of safety, as if his presence alone could shield her from the storm crashing down around them. Their moment shattered as the faint crackle of a walkie-talkie echoed outside, voices barking orders, the sound of boots on marble floors, and Damon's body tensed again, all softness gone. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, pulling open a narrow window that led out onto the garden below, turning back to her as he murmured, "We jump." Sophia gaped, shaking her head in disbelief. "What? Are you insane?" But Damon's mouth quirked into the faintest smirk as he reached for her, his hands firm on her waist, lifting her effortlessly onto the windowsill. "Trust me, Princess," he said softly, his breath warm against her ear. "I've done crazier things." Heart hammering, Sophia clung to him as they leapt, the night air rushing past them in a dizzying blur, before Damon twisted them mid-air, taking the brunt of the landing as they hit the soft grass below. She gasped, half from fear, half from the sensation of being wrapped in his arms, his body a hard wall of muscle and heat. For a split second, their faces were close, his breath mingling with hers, his eyes locked on her mouth, and Sophia felt something spark in her chest, something wild and terrifying and thrilling. But then he was pulling her to her feet, his hand wrapped tightly around hers as they darted through the shadows, slipping between hedges and stone walls, dodging the beams of searchlights sweeping the gardens. Sophia's lungs burned, her bare feet stumbled over the cold ground, yet Damon never let go, never slowed, his grip a constant steady anchor. They slipped through a side gate, out onto a quiet street where a sleek black car waited, engine running. Damon shoved the door open, ushering her inside before sliding in after her, barking a quick order to the driver as they sped off into the night. Only then, slumped against the leather seat, did Sophia let herself tremble, her hands shaking as she tried to catch her breath. She turned to Damon, her voice breaking as she whispered, "What the hell just happened?" He looked at her, his face shadowed in the dim light, and for the first time something like regret flickered across his expression. "I'm sorry," he murmured, reaching out to brush a damp strand of hair from her cheek, his touch unexpectedly gentle. "I didn't plan this, but I can't give you back now, Sophia." Her breath hitched at the sound of her name on his lips, the way it rolled softly, almost tenderly, despite the hardness in his voice. She wanted to push him away, wanted to rage, to demand answers, but instead she found herself staring at him, caught by the weight of his gaze, by the strange pull between them that had started the moment he stormed into her bathroom and claimed her with a kiss. Sophia closed her eyes, her heart pounding as she whispered, "I hate you." But the words trembled, fragile, hollow, even to her own ears. Damon's mouth curved into a faint, knowing smile as he leaned closer, his breath brushing her skin as he murmured, "No, princess, you don't." The car sped through the sleeping city, weaving expertly between the narrow streets, the gleaming towers of downtown fading into the distance as they moved toward the darker, rougher edges of town. Sophia sat tense in the back seat, arms folded tightly around herself, eyes fixed on the window as she tried to process everything, heart still racing from the chaos they had fled. Beside her, Damon leaned back with a quiet, lethal stillness, his hand resting near the concealed weapon at his side, his gaze flicking occasionally toward her with unreadable intent. The silence between them stretched until it became unbearable, thick with unspoken questions, and at last Sophia turned sharply, her voice cracking slightly as she demanded, "Tell me what's going on. Why were they after you? Why am I involved in any of this?" Damon's eyes met hers briefly, a flicker of hesitation crossing his sharp features, before he exhaled slowly, running a hand through his dark hair, his voice low and rough as he answered, "You want the truth, princess? Your family sold you out." The words hit Sophia like a blow to the chest, her breath catching as she stared at him in stunned disbelief. "That's not possible," she whispered, shaking her head, but Damon only gave a bitter, humorless smile. "Your marriage to Atherton isn't just about politics, it's about cleaning up loose ends. They knew I was closing in on them. They knew I'd come for them eventually, so they cut a deal. They give you away, they gain protection, and they hand me over to my enemies on a silver platter." Sophia's chest tightened painfully, her fingers clenching around the folds of her robe, her mind spinning. She wanted to deny it, to laugh, to call him a liar, but deep down, a part of her recognized the truth in his words, the cracks she had seen for years in her perfect family's polished facade, the cold calculations hidden beneath every smile, every hug, every gentle push toward the life they wanted for her. Damon watched her closely, his sharp gaze softening just slightly as he murmured, "I didn't mean for you to be dragged into this, Sophia, but now that you're here, you need to understand, they were never going to protect you." For a long moment, Sophia said nothing, her throat tight with unshed tears, her chest aching with the weight of betrayal. And when she finally spoke, her voice was a quiet, shaking whisper. "What do you want from me?" Damon leaned forward slightly, his presence filling the space between them, his voice low and steady. "I want you to survive, princess, and if you let me, I'll make sure you do." The car slowed, pulling into a secluded underground garage, the heavy steel doors sliding shut behind them as Damon stepped out, extending a hand to help her. Sophia hesitated, then slipped her fingers into his, feeling the solid warmth of his grip as he led her into the dimly lit corridors beyond. The air here was cooler, heavier, filled with the faint scent of oil and stone, and she followed him through a maze of winding passages until they emerged into a large industrial loft, sparsely furnished but unmistakably lived in. "This is one of my safe houses," Damon explained, his voice calm as he gestured for her to sit. "No one knows you're here. Not your family, not my enemies, no one." Sophia sank onto the edge of a leather couch, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to pull herself together, her mind spinning with questions she couldn't even begin to voice. Damon crossed the room, pulling off his bloody jacket, wincing slightly as he peeled back, keyed the fabric to reveal a fresh gash along his shoulder. Without thinking, Sophia rose, moving toward him instinctively, the sight of the wound cutting through her fog of fear and anger. "Let me help," she murmured, her fingers brushing lightly against his arm. Damon gave her a long, searching look, his lips curving faintly before he murmured, "You surprise me, princess." They worked in silence, Sophia dabbing carefully at the wound with trembling hands, while Damon watched her with an intensity that made her cheeks flush despite herself. The air between them was charged, electric, a dangerous pull she couldn't deny, even as every instinct told her to run, to escape, to break free from this man who had upended her life. When she finished, Damon caught her wrist gently, his fingers wrapping around her delicate bones, his voice a soft murmur. "Thank you." Sophia swallowed hard, her pulse quickening as she met his gaze, her voice barely audible as she whispered, "Why do you keep calling me princess?" Damon's mouth curved into a faint, almost tender smile, his thumb brushing lightly against her skin as he murmured, "Because you're still pretending. You're made for that glass tower, Sophia, but we both know you're not." The word sent a strange shiver through her, a flush of heat she didn't understand, and when she tried to pull away, Damon's grip tightened just slightly, his eyes darkening as he added quietly, "You're stronger than you think." Sophia's breath caught, her heart pounding as she stared up at him, caught between fear and something far more dangerous, something raw and magnetic that pulled her closer even as her mind screamed for distance. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her again, thought she might let him, but then the shrill ring of a phone cut sharply through the tension, snapping them both back to reality. Damon released her, stepping away as he answered the call, his voice cool and controlled as he barked a series of rapid orders, his tone shifting into the sharp authority of a man used to commanding armies. Sophia watched him from across the room, her chest tightening as she realized just how deep she was in, how far she had already been pulled from the world she knew, and how impossible it would be to go back. When he finished, Damon turned back to her, his expression grim, his voice low as he murmured, "Things just got more complicated, princess. Your fiancé? He's coming for you." Sophia's heart lurched violently as Damon's words echoed in her ears. Her fiancé is coming for her, the man she was supposed to marry, the man who represented everything her family wanted for her, the perfect alliance, the polished future, the gilded cage she had never wanted. She felt her throat tighten, her hands curling into fists at her sides as she forced herself to ask, "Why? Why would he be coming now, if he's supposed to be part of the deal?" Damon's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening as he answered, "Because Charles Atherton doesn't share, and right now, you're with me, which makes you a problem he wants to erase." The weight of those words hit Sophia hard, her knees weakening as she sank back onto the edge of the couch, her mind spinning, betrayal layering over betrayal until she could barely breathe. Damon crossed the room in a few long strides, crouching in front of her, his large hands closing gently but firmly over hers as he murmured, "Listen to me, Sophia. You have to stop thinking like you're still one of them. They're not going to save you. They're not going to protect you. You only have two choices now. Trust me, or let them destroy you." Sophia looked up at him, her breath shaking, her heart thudding painfully in her chest. And for the first time, she saw not just the dangerous man, not just the infamous Mafia boss, but the steel beneath, the raw determination, the fierce protectiveness that had already risked itself to keep her alive. Her voice came out in a whisper, broken and trembling. "Why are you doing this, Damon? Why do you care what happens to me?" Damon's mouth twisted into a faint, grim smile, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles as he murmured, "Because a long time ago, I learned what it means to lose someone you care about, and I promised myself I'd never let it happen again." Before Sophia could respond, the sharp crack of a gunshot echoed from outside, followed by another, closer this time, and Damon's head snapped up, his expression hardening into sharp, focused command. He rose swiftly, pulling Sophia to her feet, his grip steady and unyielding as he barked quick instructions to the men waiting in the shadows, his voice low but fierce, the voice of a man preparing for war. Sophia clung to his side, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts, as Damon guided her through the dim corridors, every muscle in his body coiled tight, every step calculated and sure. They burst onto a rooftop, the cold night air biting sharply against Sophia's skin as she stumbled, Damon's arm wrapping around her waist to steady her as he pulled her close. Below, black cars swarmed the streets, men in dark suits spilling out, guns drawn, eyes sharp. And at their center, Charles Atherton, his golden hair gleaming under the streetlights, his face twisted into a cold, determined mask. Sophia felt her stomach twist painfully as she watched him, the man she had once believed would be her future, now revealed as just another enemy, just another player in the game that had stolen her freedom. Damon's voice was a low murmur in her ear. "We can't stay here. They'll have this place surrounded in minutes. But if we move fast, I can get you out." Sophia turned to him, her eyes wide, her breath trembling. "What about you, Damon? You can't take them all on alone." Damon's mouth curved into a faint, wry smile, his eyes softening just slightly as he brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. "Don't worry about me, princess. I've survived worse." But even as he said the words, Sophia saw the flicker of worry in his eyes, the subtle tension in his jaw, the unspoken truth that this time he might not walk away unscathed. Her chest tightened painfully, her throat burning as she whispered, "I don't want to leave you." Damon's eyes darkened, his hand tightening briefly on her waist as he murmured, "You have to." The sound of boots pounding up the stairwell below cut off any further words, and Damon spun, pulling Sophia behind him, his gun drawn, his body a tense protective barrier as the door burst open and the first wave of attackers surged onto the roof. The world became a blur of motion, sharp cracks of gunfire splitting the night, shouts and curses ringing out as Damon moved with lethal precision, cutting through the enemy with the grace of a man who had fought and survived 100 battles before this one. Sophia crouched behind a vent, her hands clapped over her ears, her heart hammering so loudly she could barely hear, tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched Damon fight, watched him bleed, watched him refuse to fall even as the odds stacked higher and higher against him. She wanted to scream, to run to him, to help somehow, but she was frozen, trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape, until suddenly everything went still. Damon stood in the center of the roof, his chest heaving, his gun arm hanging limp at his side, blood seeping from a gash along his ribs, his eyes locked on Charles Atherton as the other man stepped forward, a cold, triumphant smile curling his lips. Charles's voice rang out clear and sharp. "It's over, Valenti. Hand her over and I might let you live." Sophia's heart stopped, her breath catching painfully in her chest as she rose shakily to her feet, stepping into the open despite the sharp cry Damon gave, his arm outstretched as if to pull her back. Her voice shook as she called out, "Charles, please, you don't have to do this." Charles's smile widened, his eyes flicking briefly to her before snapping back to Damon, his voice dripping with disdain. "Oh, Sophia, you were always just a pawn. Don't you see that?" Sophia's chest clenched painfully, her knees threatening to buckle as she looked from Charles to Damon, from the polished, perfect man her family had chosen to the dangerous, broken man who had fought to protect her. And in that moment, she knew with perfect, piercing clarity where her heart belonged. With a sudden fierce surge of determination, Sophia darted forward, seizing the moment of distraction to slam her fist into Charles's arm, knocking his gun aside just as Damon lunged, his remaining strength driving him forward in a desperate, final attack. The two men crashed together, grappling fiercely, and for a breathless moment, Sophia could only watch, heart in her throat, as Damon finally, brutally, brought Charles down, pinning him to the ground, his breath ragged, his eyes blazing with fierce, raw victory. The rooftop fell into a heavy, charged silence as Charles lay unconscious at Damon's feet, his polished suit rumpled, his perfect hair disheveled, the cold arrogance wiped clean from his face. Damon swayed slightly, his body battered and bleeding, and Sophia's breath hitched painfully in her chest as she rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she reached for him. "Damon, you're hurt," she whispered, her voice cracking, panic and fear flooding through her in waves she could barely hold back. Damon gave a faint, crooked smile, his hand lifting weakly to brush against her cheek, his thumb smearing a streak of dirt across her skin, as he murmured, "Takes more than this to finish me, princess." But Sophia could see the truth in his eyes, the sheer exhaustion pulling at the edges of his strength, the flicker of pain he couldn't quite hide. She pressed her forehead to his, her fingers tightening around his jacket, her breath shaking as she whispered, "Don't you dare die on me, Damon. I swear I will never forgive you." His soft chuckle was warm against her skin, rough and broken, and then he pulled back just slightly, his eyes dark and tender as they locked onto hers. "You're stronger than you know, Sophia," he murmured, his voice low, his fingers curling gently under her chin. "I've seen you fight, seen you stand up, seen you take every hit this world has thrown, and you are still standing. You're not a pawn anymore. You're a queen." Tears blurred Sophia's vision, her heart aching so fiercely she thought it might shatter, and before she could stop herself, she leaned forward, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was soft, desperate, trembling with everything she had held back. Damon's arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, despite the pain lancing through his body, his mouth moving against hers with a fierce, aching hunger, as if he had been waiting for this moment through every fight, every scar, every sleepless night. When they broke apart, gasping softly, Damon rested his forehead against hers, his voice a shaky whisper. "I was never supposed to love you, princess. I never planned for this." Sophia cupped his face in her hands, her tears slipping down to mix with the dirt and blood on his skin, her voice breaking as she whispered, "I know, but I love you anyway, Damon. I love you." The sharp crackle of sirens in the distance broke the moment, the sound of approaching police growing louder as the rooftops swarmed with Damon's remaining men, rushing to secure the area, to clean up the chaos left behind. Sophia clung to Damon, her heart pounding wildly as he murmured instructions, his voice slipping back into the sharp, commanding tone of a man who still held power even when his body was failing. When the police stormed the building, led by a tall, silver-haired man in a dark coat, Damon pulled Sophia close, his arm wrapping tightly around her waist, as he murmured, "Stay with me. No matter what they say, no matter what they threaten, you stay with me." Sophia nodded, her fingers curling tightly into his jacket, her chest aching with the weight of everything she felt, everything she feared, everything she refused to lose. The silver-haired man approached slowly, his sharp eyes flicking between Damon and Sophia, his mouth twisting into a faint, grim smile as he murmured, "Valenti, you just can't stay out of trouble, can you?" Damon's mouth quirked faintly, his voice dry and sardonic as he replied, "You know me, Captain. I like to keep things interesting." The captain's gaze softened just slightly as he looked at Sophia, his voice quieting as he murmured, "You're coming with us, Miss Beaumont. It's over." But before Sophia could answer, before she could even think, Damon stepped forward, his voice low and steady. "No, she's not. She stays with me." The captain's brows lifted slightly, surprise flickering across his face before he gave a faint, rueful smile, his voice soft. "You sure about that, Valenti? You know what this means? What you're dragging her into?" Damon's eyes darkened, his grip tightening around Sophia as he murmured, "She's not a pawn anymore, Captain. She's with me all the way." Sophia felt her breath catch, her heart twisting painfully in her chest, and when the captain finally nodded, signaling his men to stand down, she buried her face against Damon's chest, her arms wrapping tightly around him as she whispered, "I'm not leaving you, Damon. I'm never leaving you." The days that followed were a blur of chaos, recovery, and endless whispered negotiations behind closed doors. The balance of power shifting in the shadows as Damon fought to secure not just his empire, but Sophia's safety, his fierce, relentless determination carving a path through the tangled web of enemies and allies alike. Sophia stayed by his side through it all, her fingers laced tightly with his, her heart steady even when her body trembled, her love for him, a constant flame, burning fiercely, despite every threat, every whispered warning, every sleepless night. When Damon finally stood before her in their quiet safe house, his wounds healed, his sharp suit tailored perfectly to his tall, powerful frame, his eyes softened just slightly as they locked onto hers, Sophia felt her breath hitch, her chest tightening with a rush of emotion she could barely contain. He crossed the room in a few long strides, his hands lifting to cradle her face, his voice a soft, rough murmur as he whispered, "I've fought my whole life to survive, Sophia, but you make me want more, you make me want forever." Tears blurred Sophia's vision, her heart swelling so fiercely she thought it might burst, and when Damon sank to one knee, pulling a simple, elegant ring from his pocket, her breath caught painfully in her chest, her hands trembling as she lifted them to cover her mouth. "I know I'm not the man you were supposed to end up with," Damon murmured softly, his eyes locking onto hers with raw, aching intensity, "but I am the man who will fight for you, love you, protect you, every damn day for the rest of our lives, if you'll let me." Sophia dropped to her knees in front of him, her arms wrapping tightly around his neck as she whispered, her voice shaking with love and joy, "Yes, Damon. Yes, forever." The wedding was nothing like the grand, glittering ceremony Sophia had once been promised by her family. There were no political guests, no press cameras, no long tables of diplomats and business magnates, smiling politely for the sake of alliances. Instead, there was a quiet rooftop under a velvet sky, the stars shining faintly above, the city humming softly below, and in the center, Sophia stood wrapped in a simple silk gown, her hair falling softly over her shoulders, her heart steady as Damon took her hands in his. He looked impossibly handsome, dressed sharply in a dark suit, his usual hard edge softened just slightly by the tenderness in his eyes, the quiet reverence with which he gazed at her. For a long moment, they simply stood there, fingers intertwined, eyes locked, the rest of the world fading to nothing but the space between them. Damon's voice was low and steady, roughened slightly with emotion as he murmured, "I never thought I'd have this, Sophia. I never thought there'd be a day where I stood before someone I loved, someone who saw past the blood on my hands, someone who chose me despite everything." Sophia's throat tightened painfully, tears shimmering in her eyes, as she whispered, "I never thought I'd have this either, Damon. I spent so long thinking my life was already decided, that I was just a piece on someone else's board, but you showed me how to fight for myself, how to break free, how to love without fear." The words they spoke weren't rehearsed, weren't carefully crafted vows, but they were raw, honest, and true. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Damon pulled Sophia close, with a fierce, protective tenderness, his mouth capturing hers in a kiss that sent a rush of heat and light through her entire being, a kiss that sealed not just a promise but a transformation. They had survived betrayal, violence, danger, the weight of two broken worlds crashing together, and they had emerged not untouched, but unbroken, stronger for the scars they carried, stronger because of the love they had chosen to build together. Later, as they stood on the edge of the rooftop, Damon's arm wrapped securely around Sophia's waist, her head resting against his shoulder, they watched the city lights flicker and dance, their hearts beating quietly in sync. Sophia's voice was a soft murmur. "Do you ever wonder what it might have been like if we'd never met like this, if it had all been simple, normal?" Damon gave a faint, dry chuckle, pressing a kiss to the top of her head as he murmured, "No, princess, because nothing about us was ever meant to be simple. You don't get the kind of love we have without walking through fire to find it." Sophia smiled softly, her eyes closing as she leaned into him, her voice a quiet whisper. "We walked through fire, Damon, but we made it. We're here, together." And that, they both knew, was everything. No matter what the future held, enemies, challenges, shadows from the past, they would face it all, side by side, hearts bound not by duty or survival or circumstance, but by the fierce, unyielding love they had fought so hard to claim.